20 chefs fired. Billionaire only eats this maid's food, and now he won't let her leave. The kitchen on the 48th floor of the Ashford estate, the private Manhattan townhouse that occupied an entire city block on the Upper East Side and had been featured in 3 separate architectural magazines under headlines that used words like breathtaking and singular, was the most expensive room in a house full of expensive rooms, and it was also, by any honest measure, the most defeated. It had cost $4 million to build. The countertops were hand-quarried Calcutta marble, veined with gold the way old maps are veined with rivers. The range was a custom La Cornue Grand Palais, imported from France, capable of producing temperatures precise enough to satisfy the most demanding Michelin-starred perfectionist. The refrigeration system had been designed by an engineer who had previously worked on climate-controlled museum storage. Every knife, every pan, every copper pot hanging above the center island had been selected by a consultant whose fee alone could have purchased a modest house somewhere sensible. And in the 2 years since Nathaniel Ashford had moved into this townhouse, 20 different chefs had stood in that kitchen, cooked in that kitchen, and ultimately failed in that kitchen, walking out the door with their knives packed in their rolls and their dignity packed somewhere harder to find. Nathaniel was 33 years old, the sole heir to a financial empire his grandfather had built from a single insurance office in Pittsburgh and which now managed assets in the hundreds of billions. He had not built the empire the way some men build empires, with the white-knuckled, all-consuming hunger of someone with something to prove. He had inherited it, which meant he had grown up inside it, had been shaped by its expectations the way water shapes stone, slowly and completely. He had gone to the right schools, made the right connections, worn the right suits, and by the time he was 31, he had increased the portfolio by 40% through a combination of ruthless analysis and a near preternatural ability to read market patterns that his CFO described, with a mixture of awe and unease, as almost inhuman. He was not a war man. He was not a cold man either. He was something more precise than both, a man who had been calibrated very carefully to function at a high level within a very specific range of conditions, and who became something that resembled difficult when those conditions were not met. He had opinions. He had standards. He had, specifically and consistently, opinions and standards about food, and those opinions and standards had, over 2 years, resulted in the departure of 20 consecutive private chefs under circumstances ranging from polite mutual agreement to something considerably less polite. The 20 chefs had represented, between them, a combined total of 11 Michelin stars, 14 James Beard nominations, 3 stints at restaurants that required a 16-month reservation, and 1 appearance on a cooking competition that had, at its peak, attracted 11 million viewers. They had produced food that was, by any objective culinary standard, extraordinary. Braised short ribs that fell from the bone like a slow exhale. Risottos with the precise silken texture of something approaching a religious experience. Desserts so technically perfect that the pastry chef who made them had once been described by a food critic as operating at the intersection of art and science. Nathaniel had eaten all of it. He had eaten it with the focused, analytical attention he brought to quarterly reports and acquisition proposals. He had eaten it and found it, with few exceptions, technically accomplished and personally meaningless. He had found it, and this was the word he used, which drove his staff quietly to the edge of despair. Empty. He could not explain what he meant by empty, which was part of the problem. When his estate manager, Patricia Osei, had pressed him, gently, diplomatically, with the practiced patience of a woman who had managed complicated men for 30 years, he had said, after a long pause, "It tastes like someone solved a problem. I want food that tastes like someone cared about it." Patricia had written this down because she wrote everything down, and she had stared at it for a long time afterward. The 21st chef position had been listed for 3 weeks with a recruiting firm that specialized in ultra-high-net-worth household staffing. It had attracted 47 applicants, all of whom had declined or been declined, for reasons ranging from Nathaniel's reputation to the compensation package, which was extraordinary and which applicants seemed to find, paradoxically, alarming rather than reassuring, as though the scale of the money was itself evidence of the scale of the problem. It was Patricia who solved it, the way Patricia solved most things, sideways, practically, without fanfare. The house needed cleaning. The regular crew was between a member following a family emergency, and a replacement had been arranged through their household staffing service. The replacement was a woman named Elena Vasquez, 28 years old, experienced, reliable, and possessed of a file note that read, in the staffing coordinator's handwriting, extraordinary work ethic, discreet, warm. What the file did not note, because Elena had not mentioned it because it had not seemed relevant, was that Elena Vasquez cooked. Not professionally. Not with Michelin stars or James Beard nominations. She cooked the way her grandmother had cooked in a small house in San Antonio, Texas, the way food had been made in her family for 3 generations, with patience, with memory, with the specific gravity of someone who understands that a meal is not just sustenance, but also a form of love made edible. She cooked pozole that had to simmer for 4 hours to be right. She cooked rice that she had learned to make by listening for the sound of it, the specific whisper that meant it was perfect. She cooked things that could not be precisely reproduced because they were made, in part, from the emotion of whoever was making them on that particular day. She came to the Ashford townhouse on a Thursday morning in October, arriving through the staff entrance on the side of the building with her cleaning caddy in one hand and her daughter on her hip. Her daughter, Rosa, was 3 years old, and she was the reason Elena knew anything about perseverance. Rosa had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, and an approach to the world that involved demanding answers to questions most adults had stopped asking. She also had, on this particular Thursday, a small backpack shaped like a ladybug containing 3 picture books, 1 small set of watercolors, a container of goldfish crackers, and a stuffed bear named Captain who had, according to Rosa, been on many adventures and had the missing eye to prove it. Elena had not planned to bring Rosa. The preschool had called at 7:15 with a plumbing emergency that meant a full closure, and Elena had spent 45 frantic minutes trying to solve the childcare problem before accepting, with the resignation of a woman accustomed to making impossible situations work, that today Rosa came with her. She straightened her daughter's ladybug backpack in the elevator, looked at her with the full-beam intensity of a mother conducting a critical briefing, and said, "We are going to be so quiet today. Quieter than quiet. This is a very important man's house, and we are invisible today, okay? Like little mice." Rosa considered this with great seriousness. "Can mice talk?" she asked. "Very small words," Elena said. Rosa nodded, accepting this framework. She had her father's pragmatism.
She knew how to adapt.
Neither of them knew, riding up in that elevator, that the most important man in the house was home early, that he had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, that he was sitting in his $4 million kitchen staring at the restaurant delivery he had ordered and abandoned, that the word empty had never felt more precisely accurate than it did right now. And neither of them knew that in approximately 2 hours, the smell coming from that kitchen was going to change everything. Nathaniel Ashford had not eaten in 22 hours, and this was not, for once, the result of work. He had forgotten to eat in the past, forgotten the way people forget things that don't feel urgent when everything else is screaming louder. But today was different. Today he had ordered food. He had looked at it, sitting in its containers on his kitchen counter, and felt nothing. No appetite. No inclination. Just the flat, specific emptiness of a man sitting in a beautiful room surrounded by things he has chosen and feeling, nevertheless, unchosen. The townhouse was quiet in the particular way expensive homes are quiet, not peacefully, not restfully, but with the acoustic quality of a place where sound has been architecturally suppressed. The staff moved through on their schedules. His calendar had been cleared for the day at his request. He was supposed to be resting, which was a thing he did not know how to do, had never quite learned, like a language he'd attempted to study and set down too many times to still claim any fluency. He was in his study, adjacent to the kitchen, when he first became aware that something was happening in the house that had not been happening before. It was a sound first. Small and ordinary and entirely out of place in his townhouse. A child's voice, low and concentrated, narrating something to someone. He couldn't make out the words, only the texture of it, the soft, self-contained murmur of a small person engaged with something interesting. He sat very still and listened the way he listened to things that didn't fit his existing model of a situation. Then came the smell. It arrived without warning and without precedent in that kitchen, or rather, it arrived as the antithesis of everything that had previously been prepared in that kitchen. It was not the technically precise aroma of something constructed and calibrated. It was not the controlled, intentional fragrance of a reduction or a consommé. It was something different entirely, something that did not announce itself cleverly but simply existed, filling the air with a warmth that was almost physical. Garlic. Onion. Something that smelled like memory. Nathaniel put down the paper he was holding and looked at the wall between himself and the kitchen. In the kitchen, Elena Vasquez was not cooking. She was not supposed to be cooking. She had cleaned the second-floor library and was midway through the formal sitting room when Rosa, who had been excellent, genuinely, impressively excellent for 2 solid hours, had begun to flag in the way 3-year-olds flag when the effort of being excellent has used up its entire budget. She had begun to lean against walls. She had produced a lower lip. She had said, quietly but with great expressiveness, that she was hungry, that Captain was hungry, that everything was very hard. Elena had weighed the situation with the rapid, accurate calculation of a woman who has spent 3 years solving the specific logistical problems of loving a small person in a difficult world. Rosa needed food. Elena had brought crackers, but Rosa had already eaten the crackers, and crackers were never going to be sufficient for what Rosa's face was currently expressing. She needed something real, something warm. Elena looked at the kitchen. She had been explicitly told, during her briefing, not to use the kitchen. It was a staff boundary, clear, professional, absolute. Rosa made the face. The specific face. The one that had, on 17 documented occasions, resulted in Elena making entirely inadvisable decisions because the alternative was unbearable. Elena went to the kitchen. She was not going to cook anything significant. She was going to make something small and fast, something that used the minimum necessary ingredients and left no trace. She opened the refrigerator with the careful reverence of someone entering sacred space, because in a way she was, and she found inside it the kind of absurdly well-stocked abundance that exists in wealthy homes where food is purchased by staff for a chef who never arrives. Beautiful tomatoes, fresh herbs, good stock, half an onion left from something unfinished. She told herself she would make soup. Simple.
Quick.
20 minutes. She began. She did not think about the fact that she was cooking in a $4 million kitchen. She thought about her grandmother's hands, about the way Sunday afternoons in San Antonio had smelled, about the specific satisfaction of watching someone eat something you had made them. She moved through the kitchen with the unconscious ease of someone for whom cooking is a first language, natural and unthought, like breathing. Rosa sat on the kitchen floor with Captain and her watercolors and painted small, concentrated pictures of things she observed from her position, which included the underside of the marble island, 2 cabinet doors, and what she described as the fancy pot that looks like it has feelings. Elena added the stock. She added the garlic she had sautéed soft and golden. She added the tomatoes and let them collapse into something sweeter than they had started as. She found, in the spice cabinet, pristine, clearly purchased and never opened, dried oregano and smoked paprika, and she added those too, measuring by instinct, by smell, by the inner calibration of someone who learned to cook before she learned to read. She did not hear Nathaniel come in. She did not know he was there until she turned to find a small bowl for Rosa and found herself looking at a man standing in the doorway of his own kitchen with an expression she could not immediately read. Not angry, not surprised exactly, something more complex than either. something that involved his jaw being slightly less set than she imagined it usually was, and his eyes being fixed not on her, but on the pot on the stove with an attention that looked almost desperate. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately, setting down the bowl, already composing the apology and the explanation and the professional self-dismantling that the situation clearly required. "My daughter. She needed something to eat, and I know I wasn't supposed to use the kitchen. I'll replace whatever I used. It won't come out of the job, I can?"
"What is that?" he said.
She blinked. "Tomato soup." "I'm sorry, sir, Garlic," he said. "Yes, I sautéed it first, I find it." "Smoked paprika?" She stopped. "Yes," she said cautiously. "A little." He looked at the pot. He looked at it with the expression of a man seeing something he had almost stopped believing existed. Then he looked at her, and his voice, when he spoke, had lost some of the careful armor that she had sensed in it from the moment she entered the building.
"Could I have some?" he said.
In the kitchen floor, Rosa looked up from her watercolors, assessed the situation, and said, "Sit down. Mama's soup is the best soup in the whole world. Captain says so." Nathaniel looked at the child on his kitchen floor. He looked at her watercolors and her missing-eyed bear and her absolute certainty about the quality of her mother's soup. Then, without a word, Nathaniel Ashford sat down at his kitchen table. Elena turned to the stove, and her hands, she noticed, were not quite steady. She served the soup. A bowl for Rosa first, in the smallest bowl she could find, with crackers arranged around the edge the way Rosa liked. Then a bowl for Nathaniel, carried carefully to the table, set in front of him with all the professional composure she could assemble. He picked up the spoon. He was quiet for a long time. "This," he said finally, and then stopped. He started again. "This tastes like someone cared about it," Elena said, very quietly, before she could stop herself. He looked up at her. Something in his face shifted, moved, opened, just slightly, like a window that has been painted shut being coaxed, carefully, back to its original purpose. "Yes," he said. Exactly like that. By noon, Rosa had finished her soup and moved on to conducting an extremely thorough inspection of every low-lying cabinet in the kitchen, and Nathaniel had eaten 2 full bowls and was on his 3rd cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen table in a way he could not remember sitting in a very long time, without his phone, without his laptop, without the forward-leaning posture of a man perpetually braced for the next thing. Elena was cleaning the pot. She was trying to do it quietly, efficiently, in the way she did everything in these homes, without imposing her presence, without making herself felt. She was trying to be invisible, which was difficult because the kitchen was not a large space by townhouse standards, and because Rosa was narrating the contents of every cabinet she opened, and because the man at the table had not stopped paying attention. "How long have you cooked like that?" Nathaniel asked. She kept her eyes on the pot. "Since I was about 7, she said. "My grandmother taught me. She said cooking was just love that you could give to someone who needed it." He was quiet for a moment, and when she glanced at him, he was looking at his empty bowl with an expression she could not quite name. 20 chefs, he said. In 2 years. Good ones. Technically excellent. "I heard," she said carefully. "None of them cooked like that," he said. "None of them. I couldn't tell them what was wrong. I tried to explain it to my estate manager, and I couldn't find the words. She thought I was being difficult." "Were you?" Elena asked before she could stop herself. He considered this with unexpected seriousness. "Probably," he said. "But not about this. About this I was right, I just couldn't. There was something missing and I didn't know how to articulate it until about 20 minutes ago." Rosa had extracted a colander from a low cabinet and was wearing it on her head. Neither adult mentioned this. "It was the care," Elena said, choosing her words carefully. "You can teach technique. You can train someone to produce the correct flavors in the correct balance. But you can't train someone to mean it. Either you mean it when you cook or you don't, and food," she paused. "Food knows. Somehow. It holds what you put into it." Nathaniel looked at her then, fully, directly, with the focused attention that she had already learned, in less than 3 hours, was his natural mode of engagement with things he found genuinely interesting. It was slightly unnerving, being on the receiving end of that attention. It had nowhere to hide. "You're a cleaning professional," he said. Not dismissively, with the tone of someone attempting to square a circle. "I am," she said. "But you cook like that." "I cook like my grandmother taught me," she said simply. "It's not professional. It's personal. Those aren't the same thing." "No," he said slowly.
They really aren't.
Rosa had removed the colander from her head and was now inspecting it with the focused attention of a quality control specialist. "This one has holes," she announced. "Yes, baby," Elena said. "On purpose?" Rosa asked. "Yes," Elena said. Rosa accepted this and moved on. Nathaniel watched the child with an expression that was new on his face, soft and unguarded in a way that the 46th floor of his financial firm would not have recognized. He had no experience of children. He was an only child, raised in the particular isolating way of very wealthy only children, with every material advantage and the specific loneliness of a house where the adults are always busy and the rooms are always quiet, and you learn, early, to keep your own company. He had not thought about this for a very long time. "Her name is Rosa," he said. "Rosa Maria Vasquez," Elena confirmed. "Named for my grandmother." "And her father?" Elena was quiet for just a beat. "He left," she said, without bitterness and without the tone of someone inviting further inquiry. Simply a fact, stated cleanly, the way you state facts that have been integrated and filed. "She was 18 months old. We've been fine." He did not say he was sorry, which she appreciated. People always said they were sorry, and she had never known what to do with it, whether to accept the sorrow or reassure them that it wasn't necessary or acknowledge that yes, in fact, it had been quite hard and their sorrow was not unreasonable. "She seems very fine," he said instead. Elena looked at Rosa, who was now carefully placing small watercolor paintings, slightly damp, wildly colorful, entirely abstract, in a row along the bottom of the kitchen island, apparently curating a gallery. "She's the best person I know," Elena said, with the simple certainty of a woman stating an empirical fact. Something moved through Nathaniel's face. "I envy that," he said. "Having something you feel that clearly about." She turned from the sink to look at him directly, which she had been careful not to do, maintaining professional distances in the way she always did. He was looking at the gallery Rosa was assembling, and there was something in his expression that had nothing to do with money or power or the particular authority of someone accustomed to having things arranged to their preferences. He just looked like a man who was hungry. Not for soup. For something he hadn't eaten in a very long time. The afternoon unfolded in the way of unexpected afternoons, slowly, without agenda. Elena finished what she could of her cleaning, working around the conversation that kept interrupting her professional intentions. Rosa provided running commentary on everything she encountered. Nathaniel, who had scheduled nothing for this day, found himself unable to leave the kitchen, unable to return to his study, unable to pick up the report he had left half-read, unable to perform the reabsorption into work that usually happened automatically, reflexively, like a tide going back out. He asked Elena about her grandmother. She told him about Sunday afternoons in San Antonio, about a kitchen the size of a closet where 6 people somehow gathered, and the food was always enough, always more than enough, about the specific alchemy of tortillas made by hand on a hot comal and the way that smell still, to this day, meant safety to her in a cellular, pre-verbal way. He told her, in exchange, more than he intended to. He told her about his grandfather's desk, which sat in his study and which he sat behind every day, a man who had never met his grandfather, performing a continuity that sometimes felt less like inheritance and more like haunting. He told her about a summer when he was 11 and the estate cook had made him chicken soup when he was sick, had brought it to his room on a tray with crackers arranged in a pattern, and how it had been the most comforted he could remember feeling in that house, ever, and how he had never connected that memory to his current situation until this moment. "That's what you've been looking for," Elena said quietly. "All 20 chefs." He looked at her.
"That feeling," she said.
"Someone bringing you the tray." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. It came out rougher than he intended. "I think that's exactly it." Rosa had fallen asleep on the kitchen floor, curled around Captain, her gallery of small paintings arranged around her in a circle like a fortress of color. Elena looked at her daughter and felt the familiar compound emotion of parenthood, fierce love and helpless tenderness, and the constant, low-grade terror of knowing that this small person is your entire world, and the world is very large. "I should take her home," she said. "Elena," he said. She looked at him. "Tomorrow," he said. "Would you cook again?" I'll pay whatever the rate is, Mr. Ashford."
"Nathaniel," he said.
"Please." She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had fired 20 chefs, sitting at his kitchen table with an empty bowl and an expression that was, for all its complications, essentially very simple. She looked at Rosa on the floor. She looked at the pot she had cooked in, still sitting on the stove.
"Arroz con pollo," she said.
"Tomorrow. But Rosa comes with me." "Obviously," he said, and the relief in his voice was not a small thing. 2 weeks passed the way weeks pass when something real is beginning, slowly in each individual hour, and then, looking back, impossibly fast. Elena came every day. This had not been the plan. The plan had been occasional cooking alongside her regular cleaning schedule, a professional arrangement with clear boundaries and appropriate compensation, managed by Patricia with contracts and invoices and all the correct institutional scaffolding of 2 people who understand where they stand. But the arroz con pollo had led to a conversation about her grandmother's red chili sauce, which had led to Nathaniel asking if she had ever made it here, which had led to her making it the following morning, which had led to the most significant silence Nathaniel Ashford had produced in years. A silence of someone eating something that has reached some part of them that words don't touch. And then he had said, very quietly, "Could you teach me?" She had looked at him. "To cook?" "To cook like that," he said. "Like it matters." So she had taught him. Not technique. The professional chefs had supplied him with all the technique he would ever need. She taught him the other things. She taught him to smell the garlic to know when it was right. She taught him to listen to the rice the way her grandmother had taught her to listen. She taught him to taste at every stage, not analytically, not evaluatively, but openly, to actually receive what the food was telling him. He was a terrible student in the traditional sense. He was impatient. He wanted to understand the principle before he could apply it. He kept trying to find the formula, the replicable rule, and she kept telling him there wasn't one, and he kept finding this response deeply unsatisfying, and she kept finding his frustration quietly hilarious. Rosa was an excellent kitchen companion. She had appointed herself quality control, which meant she tasted everything and delivered verdicts of great specificity. "Need more love," she told Nathaniel about his first attempt at rice, and he had looked at Elena in genuine helplessness, and Elena had said, trying not to smile, "Less heat. More patience." Same thing, basically. He had gotten better. Not because he had mastered the technique, he hadn't, but because somewhere in the daily practice of standing in a kitchen and making food for people who were going to eat it, something in him had shifted. He had stopped trying to optimize the outcome and started simply being present in the process, and the food, as Elena had told him, knew the difference. Rosa, for her part, had expanded her operations to the entire kitchen. She had a dedicated drawer. Nathaniel had quietly emptied it one morning and placed inside it a set of plastic measuring cups, a small wooden spoon, and a child's apron printed with small red chiles, which he had ordered online, and which Elena had found hanging on the drawer handle one morning with a small note that said, in his precise handwriting, "For the Quality Control Department." Elena had stood there with the apron in her hands for a long moment, feeling something shift inside her that she was not yet ready to name. She had been careful. She was always careful. She had spent 4 years being careful, building a life one reliable brick at a time, and she knew the difference between a beautiful morning and a permanent thing. She knew that this man existed in a different universe than the one she occupied, that the kitchen they stood in together every day was his kitchen, and she was in it by arrangement, and arrangement was not the same as belonging. But then small things kept happening that complicated that reasoning. He remembered, without being reminded, that Rosa didn't like bell peppers. He noticed, one afternoon, that Elena's hands were cracked from the cleaning work, and the next day there was a small bottle of hand cream sitting by the sink with a completely casual air, as if it had simply appeared there, as if nobody had put it there deliberately. He asked Rosa, seriously and without condescension, about Captain's ongoing adventures, and listened to the answer with the same focused attention he gave to financial briefings. And one evening, she had stayed late, a Thursday, working on a dish that required longer simmering. He sat across the kitchen island while Rosa drew pictures between them and Elena cooked, and the kitchen was full of warmth and smell and the small sounds of a child narrating her artwork, and he said, almost to himself, "This is what I thought a home was supposed to feel like." She had kept her eyes on the pot. "What did it feel like before?" she asked. "A very well-maintained building," he said. Rosa looked up from her drawing. "Our home smells like Mama's cooking and Captain," she said, with the authoritative tone of someone reporting objective fact. "That sounds exactly right," Nathaniel said. "You can come visit," Rosa offered generously. "We have a small couch, but it's comfortable. Mama says so when she's tired." Elena closed her eyes briefly. "That's very kind," Nathaniel said, with a particular gravity he had begun to use when talking to Rosa, the tone of someone who has learned that small people deserve to be taken seriously. "I'd like that very much." Elena opened her eyes and found him looking at her, not at Rosa, and she made herself look back, made herself hold the look for a moment before turning back to the stove, and she thought, "I am in so much trouble." That night, after Rosa was in bed and the apartment in the Bronx was quiet, she called her sister Marisol, who was 32 and pragmatic and employed as a nurse and constitutionally incapable of telling Elena what she wanted to hear. "I need you to tell me I'm being foolish," Elena said. Marisol was quiet for 3 seconds. "Tell me the thing first." Elena told her the thing. Marisol was quiet for longer this time. "Ellie," she said finally, using the name nobody else used, the childhood name. "Is he a good man?" Elena thought about the hand cream by the sink, the chilly apron, the drawer emptied and filled with things for Rosa. 20 evenings of sitting across a kitchen island from a man who had stopped pretending to need his phone. "I think he might be learning to be," she said. "Then," Marisol said, with the clinical directness of a woman who deals in reality for a living, "you are not being foolish. You are being scared. Those are not the same thing." Elena lay awake for a long time, listening to Rosa breathing in the next room. She thought about what her grandmother had said in that small San Antonio kitchen. The best meals are the ones where you stop worrying about getting it right and just cook.
She had always thought that was about food.
She was beginning to think it was about something larger. It was Patricia Osei who said it first, because Patricia said most true things first, with the calm and the directness of someone who has watched enough situations develop to recognize the shape of them early. She came to Nathaniel's study on a Friday morning in the 4th week, closed the door, and sat across from him with the precise posture of a woman conducting a necessary and not entirely comfortable conversation. "The arrangement with Ms. Vasquez," she said. He looked up from his laptop. "What about it?" "It's become something that may be difficult to classify," Patricia said. "Contractually, professionally."
She paused.
"And possibly otherwise." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling, which was the action of a man buying himself time. "She's cooking here every day," Patricia continued, measuring her words. "You've cleared your mornings consistently for 4 weeks. Rosa has a drawer." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not making a judgment. I'm noting that you have not eaten at a restaurant or ordered delivery in 29 days, which is, in my tenure with you, unprecedented." And when I asked Ms. Vasquez yesterday if she would consider a formal personal chef contract, she became very quiet and said she would need to think about it. She said that, he said.
She did.
Which tells me, Patricia said, with the patient precision of someone who has managed his household for 6 years and therefore knows him better than most, that she is not certain what the right thing is. And I think, Nathaniel, that you may owe her clarity. The thing about Patricia, which Nathaniel had always appreciated and sometimes found inconvenient, was that she was correct. He found Elena in the kitchen that afternoon, prepping for the evening. She was making tamales, which required advanced preparation and the particular focused calm of someone engaged with a process they know intimately. Rosa was at the table with her watercolors, painting a picture she had described as Mama cooking and Captain helping and the man who is learning. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen doorway. Elena had her back to him, her hands moving through the masa with the sure, unhurried rhythm of someone who has done this 1,000 times. The kitchen was warm. It smelled extraordinary. Rosa had added to her gallery since last week, and the small paintings were taped in a row along the bottom of the island now. Explosions of color, completely fearless, making the most expensive kitchen in Manhattan look, finally, like somewhere a person actually lived. Elena, he said. She turned. She read his face. She was good at this, had become very good at this over 4 weeks of standing in kitchens with him, and something in her expression became careful and braced, the expression of someone who has learned not to let themselves expect things. Patricia says you need to think about the chef contract, he said. I do, she said simply. Can I ask why? She looked at her hands, flour-dusted, warm from the masa. She looked at Rosa, who was adding details to her painting with the concentrated tongue-between-teeth focus of creative effort. She looked at him. Because I don't know what I'm doing here, she said. And I need to know. I'm very good at my job, Nathaniel. I can cook. I can clean. I understand professional arrangements, and I can work within them. But if I sign a contract to be your chef, I need to know that's what this is. A professional arrangement. He was quiet for a moment. And if it's not, he said. Then I need to know that too, she said. Because I have Rosa. And I don't have she paused, finding the words. I don't have the luxury of not being certain. When you have a child, you don't get to take risks that involve her. She's already attached to this kitchen. She knows your name. She knows where the crackers are. She knows that Thursday means tamales and that you always let her put the first spoonful of masa on the husk. I can't, her voice steadied. I can't let her get more attached than she already is if this is a job. Because when jobs end, you leave. That's what jobs do. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and stood on the other side of the island, facing her, with only the marble between them. He looked at her with the full attention that she had learned was just how he was, entirely present, entirely serious, offering the same engagement to this moment that he offered to every other moment in his life that he had decided mattered. I fired 20 chefs, he said. I want you to understand why. The food. No, he said. Not just the food. I fired them because something was missing, and I kept thinking it was something they were doing wrong. Something about technique or ingredients or approach. I kept thinking if I found the right person, the right level of skill, the thing would be there.
He paused.
I didn't understand what the thing was until you made soup on a Thursday morning in October for a 3-year-old who needed feeding. Elena did not move. It wasn't the cooking, he said. It was that you weren't cooking for me. You were cooking for her. You were cooking because she needed something warm and you love her, and you know how to turn that love into food. And I sat down at that table and ate something that was made entirely out of that, out of love, out of the specific quality of a person who loves someone that much. And he stopped. Started again. I haven't eaten food that tasted like something real in years. Maybe longer. Rosa, who had been painting with great concentration, said without looking up, Mama's food tastes like home. They both looked at her. Yes, Nathaniel said, quietly to Elena. It does. Nathaniel, Elena said, her voice very soft. I don't want a professional chef, he said. I want to figure out what this is. I want to have the conversation. I know what I am, and I know what that means, and I know I know the distance between us in every measurable way, and I know that's real and it matters, and I'm not pretending it doesn't. He put his hands flat on the marble. But I cannot pretend that I want you here 5 days a week, because you make good tamales. The kitchen was very quiet except for Rosa's watercolors and the sound of the city far below. I'm scared, Elena said finally. Simply. I know, he said. I am too. Rosa looked up from her painting. She looked at them both with those dark, evaluating eyes. She held up her painting, the one she had been working on all afternoon, and in it there were 3 people standing in a kitchen. The middle one was small with a round head and was definitely Rosa. On one side was a tall, dark-haired woman who was clearly meant to be Elena. On the other side was a tall figure with what appeared to be a very serious expression, and above all 3 of them was a yellow sun. I made our family, Rosa announced. Captain says it's good. Neither adult spoke for a moment. Then Elena laughed, the real laugh, the one that didn't think about whether it was appropriate, the one that came from somewhere genuine. And Nathaniel, 33 years old, master of a financial empire, conqueror of markets and acquirer of companies, stood in his warm kitchen that smelled like tamales and looked at the painting in a 3-year-old's hands and felt something in his chest go so soft it was almost painful. It's very good, he said. To Rosa. And, quietly, to Elena. We can be scared together. The tamales were, by any honest assessment, the best thing ever made in that $4 million kitchen. This was the consensus of everyone who ate them. Patricia, who had been invited to stay for dinner for the first time in 6 years and who sat at the kitchen table with her eyes closed after the first bite. Marcus, Nathaniel's assistant, who had been summoned ostensibly to discuss a portfolio matter and had been detained by the smell, and Rosa, who ate 2.5 and declared the remaining half to be Captain's. And Captain did not complain. Nathaniel ate 4. He ate them the way Elena had taught him to eat things she cooked, not analytically, not assessingly, but openly present to it, letting it be what it was. It was the 2nd Saturday of December, and the kitchen was full in a way it had never been. Not crowded, full, in the way that has nothing to do with the number of people and everything to do with whether people are actually there, present, alive to the moment they're occupying. There were small paintings taped along the bottom of the island, a full wall of them now. There was a dedicated drawer for Rosa. There was a cracked ceramic pot on the counter that had belonged to Elena's grandmother and which she had brought one morning with the careful nonchalance of someone pretending they're not doing something significant, and which Nathaniel had placed in the center of the counter and not moved. The conversations that had happened in the weeks between that Friday afternoon and this Saturday evening had been the kind of conversations that happen when 2 careful people decide to stop being careful, slow and real and sometimes hard and punctuated by Rosa's interpretations, which were consistently illuminating and occasionally mortifying. She had told Nathaniel, during one such conversation, that her mama cried sometimes when she thought Rosa was asleep, and that the crying sounded different lately. Less sad, more like the crying Rosa did when something was so nice it made her feel too full. Nathaniel had looked at Elena, and Elena had looked at her dinner plate, and Rosa had gone back to her crackers, satisfied that she had provided useful information. He had not rushed anything. This had required, for him, a form of patience he had not previously exercised, the patience of someone who understands that the most important things cannot be optimized, cannot be efficiently acquired, cannot be moved at the speed of a financial transaction. Elena had needed time. Rosa had needed consistency. He had given them both because they were worth it in a way that went beyond worth, beyond measure, beyond category. He had called his own estate manager one morning and asked her, with the slight discomfort of a man doing something entirely new, to locate an elementary education program with evening options in the city. He had put the information in an envelope and left it on the counter beside the ceramic pot without saying anything, and Elena had found it and stood still for a long time, and then picked it up and put it in her bag. She had enrolled 2 weeks later. She had told him at the kitchen island, over coffee, matter-of-factly, the way she told him most important things, without fanfare, without making it into more than it was, trusting him to understand what it cost her and what it meant. He had nodded. He had not said anything that might cheapen it. She had said, "Thank you." He had said, "Thank your grandmother.
She taught you to feed people.
I'm just feeding you back." On this Saturday evening in December, with the tamales distributed and the kitchen warm and the city outside doing its winter business of cold and light, Nathaniel stood at the stove, and Elena sat at the table watching him, and Rosa was between them, painting. He was making hot chocolate. He was making it the way Elena had shown him. Real chocolate, milk warmed slowly, a piece of cinnamon stick, stirred with patience and attention. He was making it badly by professional standards and perfectly by the only standard that mattered. He carried 3 mugs to the table. He set Rosa's down first, in the small cup they kept specifically for her now, printed with small suns. He set Elena's down in front of her, and she wrapped her hands around it and looked up at him. "Sit down," she said softly. He sat. The 3 of them sat at the kitchen table in the warm room, and it was quiet in the way that real quiet is, not empty, not suppressed, but full and content and resting in itself, the quiet of enough. Rosa took a sip of her hot chocolate. She considered it with great seriousness. "Good," she said to Nathaniel. "You put love." "I tried," he said.
It worked, she said.
Elena laughed. She reached across the table and put her hand over Nathaniel's, where it rested beside his mug, just placed her hand there, warm and certain, in the simple, unguarded way of someone who has decided that the thing they were afraid of is worth being afraid of, worth stepping into anyway, because the alternative is being safe in an empty kitchen. He turned his hand over and held hers. Rosa looked at their hands. She looked at her painting. She looked at them both with the dark, knowing eyes of a 3-year-old who has decided that the world is fundamentally good and that people, given time and warmth and the right kind of soup, tend to find their way to one another. "Our family," she said again, pointing at her painting. On the counter, beside the ceramic pot that had belonged to Elena's grandmother, Nathaniel had placed something that morning, quietly, without announcement, a small framed photograph. It was not a family photograph. There were no family photographs yet, though he had already, in some part of himself, begun to imagine them. It was a photograph of the kitchen, taken from the doorway, on a morning when the light had come through the windows in a particular way and caught the paintings on the island and Rosa's apron hanging on its hook and the pot on the stove with something simmering in it. He had printed it because he wanted the room to have a memory of itself. He wanted the house to know that something real had happened here. Elena had seen it when she arrived this morning and had said nothing, just touched the frame briefly with 2 fingers, the same way she touched things that mattered to her, lightly, as if making sure they were real. They were real. Outside, December moved through the city in its cold and particular way, indifferent to the specific small miracle occurring on the 48th floor of a brownstone on the Upper East Side. Inside, in a kitchen that had cost $4 million and had finally, after all that, become worth every penny, not for the marble or the imported range or the museum-quality refrigeration, but for the warmth in it now, the paintings, the ceramic pot, the 3 mugs of imperfect hot chocolate, 3 people sat at a table. A woman who had learned to carry the weight of love and not let it break her. A man who had learned that the thing he'd been hungry for had nothing to do with food. A child who had known from the beginning what both of them were working toward, who had drawn it in watercolors on a kitchen floor and presented it as fact, because to her it always had been. The hot chocolate was not perfect. The tamales were extraordinary. The kitchen smelled like something that, if you could bottle it and sell it, every person in the world would spend everything they had to take it home. But you cannot bottle it. You cannot acquire it. You cannot hire 20 chefs and find it at the bottom of the list. You can only make it the way Elena's grandmother said you make everything that matters, with patience, with presence, with your whole heart in the pot. And you have to mean it. Rosa put down her paintbrush and climbed into Elena's lap, arranging herself with the proprietary ease of a child who knows exactly where she belongs. Nathaniel looked at the two of them. He looked at the room around him, this room that had defeated 20 brilliant people, that had sat cold and technically perfect and empty, that had now been filled by a woman with a cracked ceramic pot and flour on her hands and a daughter who painted families on kitchen floors. "I need to say something," he said. Elena looked at him. "I don't want you to leave," he said. "Not after the cleaning. Not after the cooking. Not after anything." He said it simply, without artifice, the way she talked about things that mattered. "I want you to stay. Both of you. I want this." He gestured at the table, the paintings, the mugs, the room. "I want this to be yours too." Rosa, without hesitation, said, "Yes. Captain wants to live here," he said. Elena looked at her daughter. She looked at the room. She looked at this man who had started, 4 weeks ago, as something she was afraid to meet the eyes of, and who had become, in the daily accumulating evidence of small and genuine things, someone she trusted. "We'll need to paint some walls," she said. "Any color," he said immediately. "Rosa picks," she said. "Obviously," he said. Rosa pointed to her painting on the table, the one with the yellow sun and the 3 people and the big, impossible, perfect smile she had given the man who was learning. "Yellow," she said. "Like the sun. So it's always warm." Nathaniel looked at Elena. Elena looked at Nathaniel. The kitchen was warm. The hot chocolate was cooling in 3 mugs. Outside, December kept doing what December does. Inside, for the first time in a very long time for 2 of them, and from the very beginning for one, home was exactly where they were.